the preterist view really has to take the entire book of Revelation as one big symbolic allegory, you know.
Hmm.
And while a lot of it is symbolic, I mean, certainly there's imagery all over the book of Revelation, but you have an angel that comes alongside and explains it. Hey, you know that weird freaky beast you're looking at, it represents this. You know, but then you have other descriptions that don't have that added elaboration, like the bottomless pit being opened and all these chimeric centaur, locust, scorpion tail,
Right. Right.
creatures coming out and stinging people for 5 months and stuff like that. I'm like, I mean, you really got to spin off into all kinds of fantasy if you're gonna say this is symbolic. I mean, there's no angel coming along to John and saying, "Hey, all those weird bees, 200 million horseman army coming up out of the bottomless pit, that represents this." So in my mind, where you don't have the angel character or somebody coming alongside the narrative and saying, "Hey, here's what the symbol represents," when you don't have that, I just take it literally. That's why I'm not a preterist.
Well,
Because
I'll go back to the context of the very premise of the book. The prophecy was made that all of Israel would be going back to Egypt. Only Judah was in land at the time.
right,
You can't say just because they called themselves Israel, they were known as Judah. They were the Jews. The northern tribes were called Israel, the people. So it can't be fulfilled. If you're going to hold to the literal interpretation, the interpretation is all of them would go to Egypt. Not all of them went to Egypt.
yeah.
So my opinion is it's not totally completely fulfilled. It's been undergoing fulfillment for the last 2,000 years. In my opinion, it's the reason why there has been this much time, is that God is fulfilling his promise, and it's taken this long for that promise to fulfill, for this system to work itself out and overtake through successive conquerings to take over the world. It's just taken that long.
Yeah, I'm gonna put something up on the screen here, also. And I understand people will be listening to this on the radio, so that they're not gonna be able to see this. But for those who have the ability to go to Virtual House Church, if you go to virtualhousechurch.com, and let me screen share this here. There's this map that I have on there, uh, of called the Restoration of Israel, and it shows all these blue dots, right? These represent what I call the Ephraim awakening. These are people all over the world just waking up and realizing that we've gone so far astray and we need to get back to the basics, get back to the scriptures, starting with the Torah, starting with Genesis. And it's what I call the Ephraim awakening. It's the moment that Ephraim wakes up in the pig pen. Is like, what am I got myself into? I need to turn around and head back home. Maybe Dad will accept me. The other reason for the delay, I believe, that the 2,000 years that it's been, is for this to happen. I mean, if you think about the Tower of Babel and what L.A. Marzulli refers to as the cosmic chess match, I always have this idea in my head of, if there's 70 different languages that came out of the Tower of Babel, I believe the original language from which all those were dispersed was Hebrew. If that's true, then I believe I just have this image in my mind. You've probably seen the image on, if you just do a Google image search for Jesus arm wrestling the devil, it shows that, the devil on one side and Jesus on the other, and they're arm wrestling.
Right.
I kind of have this idea in my head of, okay, you want to take me on? Fine. You take 69, I'll take one. Give it your best shot. And so the devil's got 69 principalities to work with, 69 people groups, and Yahuwah is just working with that one people group, the Hebrews. And the devil has been able to do a lot with the 69 pieces over the last 5,000 plus, almost 6,000 years, right? But meanwhile, God's just sort of been working with this one little people group. And then in his sovereign, amazing wisdom, he disperses his one into the 69 in 721 roughly BC. And however many people they were, got dispersed into all the nations. But 2,000 years later, we're all waking up. We're waking up all over the world now. In other words, in the 69 territories, principality, territories of the devil, his people are waking up. At the same time, God's turning all of the world into Egypt, to go along with your thesis, so that at the right moment, he can pull all these blue dots and what they represent, the thousands and millions of people that they represent, out of Egypt into his land.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's phenomenal. I think that scripture is being fulfilled in the book of Daniel. It says, at the time of the end, people will run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. I don't think, it's just natural knowledge. I think the running to and fro and searching throughout the book, I think, what you have presented, what, you mentioned Tom Horn in his book, Apollyon Rising, and there are others. I mean, it just seems like there's been an explosion, Doug Hamp, or others who have began to bring forth this research into the DNA and the possible connections that it has to fulfilling, the mark of the beast and all that. These things are remarkable. There's just been an explosion of understanding of these prophetical verses of what they could mean now. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think, it's fulfilling that word that knowledge is increasing also in the scripture. I don't think it could be just said of natural knowledge or worldly knowledge that increase is taking place.
Yeah. I was just having a conversation with somebody today, as a matter of fact, about that scripture in the last days, knowledge shall increase. And when you look that scripture up, I believe that's in the book of Daniel.
Mm-hmm.
The word for knowledge is preceded with the letter Hey. And when the Hebrew letter Hey precedes a word, it serves the function of meaning the. So it's not just knowledge, general knowledge, it's the knowledge.
Right.
Shall increase in the last days. And, again, I think this may be part of that, the knowledge of getting back to the basics, getting back to God's plan, but also a lot of other things. There just seems to be an increased, awareness, understanding, revelation. When people read the scriptures now, they are seeing things that seems like hardly anybody's seen before, but now all of a sudden lots of us are seeing things that weren't seen before. And I think people like Hal Lindsey and others, I subscribed to his worldview for a long time, and I think it served a purpose. I think that there are people like Hal Lindsey, for instance, that comes up, through the 70s and whatnot, and late Great Planet Earth and stuff like that, who, as a watchman on the wall, looking at the signs and interpreting scripture, I guess, through the lens of current events and whatnot, is seeing things and making correlations. Now, was he right about all those things? I don't think so. But at that time, I'm talking like in the 80s now, when I looked at some of his interpretive, the way he looked at things, like, for instance, the locusts we were talking about coming up out of the bottomless pit, and they have the hair like a woman, and teeth like a lion, and the sound of these things is like the sound of rushing chariots and whatnot. And he was saying that, well, that kind of fits a Cobra helicopter.
Right.
And what was interesting about some of the interpretations that he had in that regard was, when I was in the military at that time, I was in a Cav squadron. So we had Cobras and Loaches. Loaches were scout helicopters.
Right.
And the Cobras had the shark teeth painted on them with the face on it. So so every day I'd go out to the flight line and I'd look at all these Cobras, and you see them fire it up, and it sounds like, the sound of rushing chariots. And, how the mindset was, how else would a first century author describe a Cobra or an Apache or a tank? So he's using the best, analogies that he could give, for his time. And that made sense to me.
Mhm.
But that's 80s, 70s and 80s. But as you progress into the 2000s and transhumanism starts, coming on the scene, and chimera is all of a sudden something worth talking about and looking at, and realizing that, wow, we are at a time when we actually have the ability to blend species together. And they're already saying, if we keep doing what we're doing, eventually the genes are going to fuse together, or you're going to end up with animal human hybrids. And wow, we're right back in Greek mythology days with centaurs and stuff like that. And I'm going, okay, this is happening in laboratories today. This is the 2045 Strategic Social Initiative being played out. This is Nick Bostrom's dream come true. Transhumanism, the blending of species. Well, all of a sudden then I could take that scripture very literal. I didn't need to force a certain mindset upon the scriptures and say, well, John didn't know how to describe a cobra. Maybe he really is seeing chimeric centaur creatures coming up out of the bottomless pit. As it was, so it shall be.
Right.
There's nothing new under the sun. So, I think we're at a time where, Yeshua said, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be at the coming of the Son of Man, that the knowledge that was known at the time of Noah is increasing.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think time is the only key that could unlock this this information. It couldn't have happened earlier. It couldn't have happened later. Everything is happening perfectly at the time it has to happen.